My face was staring back at me from the conference room whiteboard, marked Streamlined Target in thick red marker. Right next to three other photos, Jim Patterson, Al Rodriguez, Steve Walsh, all of us over 45, all with the same neat corporate handwriting underneath our pictures like we were suspects in some efficiency manhunt. Marcus Thompson, 48 years old. That's me telling you the story, because someone needs to hear what really happens when young management decides to modernize a company that's been running just fine for 22 years. I sat there in that beige conference room, watching Lisa Parker pace back and forth in her designer heels, gesturing with that red marker like she was conducting some corporate orchestra. The smell of stale coffee and bad decisions hung in the air. Behind her, our employee photos looked like a police lineup, and in a way, that's exactly what this was. Lisa got promoted to VP of Operations back in February, fresh out of her MBA program at Northwestern, riding on Daddy's connections since her old man Tom Morrison sits on the board of directors. She spent her first week talking about agile methodologies and disruptive innovation like she'd personally invented the phrases. The rest of us just kept doing our jobs, keeping the lights on, making sure government contracts got fulfilled on time and under budget. But sitting in that conference room, watching her tap my photo with that marker, I knew the game had completely changed. These legacy employees, she said, not even looking at me directly, represent outdated thinking patterns that are holding us back. We need fresh energy, streamlined processes, digital native mindsets to compete in today's marketplace. Legacy employees. I'd been with Morrison Defense Solutions for 22 years. Started as a junior logistics coordinator right after my Army discharge from Fort Bragg, worked my way up to senior operations director through 3 CEOs, 4 major restructures, and countless hotshot managers who came and went like seasonal weather. But I'd never been called legacy before. The other guys in that room had the same expression I probably did. That quiet recognition that comes when you realize you're not in a meeting, you're in an execution. Jim Patterson from Quality Assurance, 52 years old, been there 18 years. Al Rodriguez from Procurement, 49, started the same month I did. Steve Walsh from Contract Management, 51, knew every federal regulation by heart. Between the 4 of us, we had 73 years of institutional knowledge. But Lisa Parker saw us as obstacles to her vision of a lean, modern operation. The board has approved a comprehensive operational realignment, Lisa continued, clicking through her PowerPoint presentation like she was announcing a company picnic. Effective immediately, we'll be implementing new authorization protocols, updated security clearances, and streamlined reporting structures. She paused at a slide titled Digital Transformation Initiative and finally looked directly at me. Marcus, your current role will be absorbed into our new automated systems framework. Your badge access will be suspended pending transition documentation and knowledge transfer to our junior staff. Just like that. 22 years of service, and she made it sound like updating software. I didn't say anything. Learned that lesson in the Army. When someone's already made up their mind, arguing just gives them more ammunition to use against you later. But I was thinking about something else entirely. Something Lisa didn't know about. Something I'd put in place after the last time management tried to push out experienced staff without thinking through the consequences. See, back in 2019, there was this incident. Company tried to restructure 3 senior guys right before a major federal audit, thinking they could replace 60 years of combined experience with cheaper labor and automated systems. Cost us a $12 million Department of Defense contract when the new team couldn't navigate the compliance requirements. Took 8 months to rebuild our reputation with the contracting officers. That's when I drafted Clause G15.7. It's buried deep in the Operational Continuity Manual, subsection 15, paragraph 7. Most people never read past the first page of that 847-page document. But it's ironclad legal language that I wrote myself with help from our legal department and input from Sarah Brooks, our compliance officer. Basically states that if a senior operations director with active security clearance gets terminated without proper documentation during an active contract period, all high-value government transactions get automatically frozen pending dual authorization review. The clause was designed to protect the company from exactly what Lisa was doing right now, and she'd initialed that manual when she took the VP position 6 months ago. Hell, she probably never even opened it. "I'll need your building access card," she said, holding out her hand like I was some teenager getting kicked out of the mall. I reached into my wallet, pulled out the badge that had gotten me through those security doors every morning for over 2 decades, and placed it on the conference table. not in her hand, on the table. "Security will escort you to collect personal items," she added. "We appreciate your years of service, Marcus, but this transition needs to happen cleanly and efficiently." That's when I almost smiled. Almost. Because Lisa Parker had just triggered every safeguard I'd spent 3 years putting in place. She'd terminated the one person in that building who understood how the money moved, how the contracts flowed, and how to keep the federal compliance officers happy. And she'd done it without reading a single page of the protocols she'd agreed to follow. I stood up, straightened my tie, and looked around the room one more time. Jim, Al, and Steve were staring at the table, probably wondering if they were next. They were good men, solid workers, but they didn't have the institutional knowledge I carried. They didn't know about the automated triggers, the backup systems, the careful safeguards I'd built into every major contract we held. "Lisa," I said, keeping my voice level and professional, "you might want to review the operational continuity manual before close of business today. Section 15 specifically." She gave me that patronizing smile young managers perfect in business school. "Marcus, I appreciate the advice, but we've got this handled. Our new systems are much more efficient than the old manual processes." I nodded, picked up my coffee mug, the one that said 20 years of service that I'd gotten last Christmas, and walked toward the door. Security was waiting in the hallway, 2 guys I'd known for years who couldn't meet my eyes. Bob Martinez from the front desk, been there 12 years. Tony Martinez from night security, good man, former Marine like half the guys who ended up in defense contracting. They knew this wasn't right, but they had mortgages and families and couldn't afford to make waves. As we walked past the operations center, I could see my team working at their stations, tracking shipments, monitoring compliance deadlines, keeping the machine running. They didn't know yet what Lisa had just set in motion. Didn't know that come Monday morning, when the automated system started their weekly processing cycle, everything was going to come to a very sudden stop. I packed my personal items methodically. The Army taught me that. When you're rotating out of a position, you do it right. 22 years of accumulated life fit into 2 cardboard boxes. Photos of the team at various company events. My excellence in compliance plaques from 2018 and 2021. A small American flag that had been on my desk since day one. The coffee mug went in last. "Sorry about this, Marcus," Bob said quietly as we waited for the elevator. "This whole thing stinks." I nodded but didn't say anything. Bob was a good man, but he didn't understand what was really happening here. None of them did. They saw this as corporate politics, maybe some generational conflict between old school management and new MBA thinking. They didn't see the bigger picture. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I finally allowed myself a small smile. Lisa Parker thought she was modernizing Morrison Defense Solutions. What she'd actually done was trigger the most comprehensive compliance review in the company's 31-year history. The weekend passed quietly. Saturday morning, I drove to the hardware store, bought some paint for the kitchen I'd been meaning to get to for months. Spent the afternoon working on the house, listening to old country music, thinking about what Monday would bring. Sunday, I called my brother Dave down in Atlanta, caught up on family news, didn't mention the job situation. No point worrying him until I knew how this was going to play out. Army habits die hard. I was up at Euro 500 Monday morning, same as always. Made coffee, read the news online, checked my personal email. Nothing from Morrison Defense Solutions yet, but that would change soon enough. The automated compliance system would start its weekly review cycle at exactly 07:45, same time every Monday for the past 6 years. Federal requirement: any defense contractor with active projects over $5 million has to run these systematic checks. I'd designed most of those checks myself, working with Sarah Brooks in the IT department to create a system that caught problems before they became audit flags. Took us 18 months to build it properly, another 6 months to get all the federal agencies comfortable with our protocols. But it worked. Morrison hadn't failed a single compliance review since we implemented it. The system would hit clause G15.7 like a freight train hitting a stalled car. At exactly 07:45, somewhere in Morrison's server room, the automated compliance system began its weekly scan. Every active contract, every pending payment, every authorization protocol. Looking for gaps, inconsistencies, potential violations. The kind of thorough review that keeps defense contractors in good standing with federal agencies and prevents the kind of mistakes that can cost millions. The system found my terminated credentials immediately. Senior Operations Director, active security clearance, terminated Friday afternoon without proper documentation. No HR filing, no formal review process, no transition protocol. Just gone. Within minutes, 3 separate alerts triggered simultaneously. One to Coastal Bank and Trust, flagging all transactions over $50,000 for dual authorization review per federal compliance requirements. One to the Defense Contract Audit Agency, notifying them of a potential operational continuity breach. And one to Morrison's legal department requesting immediate documentation review for critical personnel termination without protocol. My phone rang at 0823, Sarah Brooks from legal, and I could hear the panic in her voice even before she spoke. "Marcus," she said, papers shuffling in the background, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did Lisa Parker terminate your employment Friday without filing proper documentation with HR?" I took a sip of coffee, set the mug down carefully. "That's correct, Sarah. Jesus Christ." Long pause. "Marcus, do you have any idea what she's triggered?" "I wrote the clause, Sarah. I know exactly what she triggered." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear computer keys clicking, probably pulling up the compliance manual. "The DCAA wants a full operational review. Coastal Bank has frozen $3.7 million in pending transfers. And we just lost preliminary approval on the Port Authority logistics contract. That last one made me sit up straighter. The Port Authority deal was worth $18 million over 3 years. Morrison had been courting that contract for 8 months, beating out 12 other companies to make the final cut. Losing preliminary approval meant they were off the bidding list entirely, disqualified for compliance violations. "How's Lisa handling the news?" I asked. Sarah's laugh was bitter. "She's been in back-to-back meetings since 0700. Keeps asking if there's a way to reverse the automated flags, wants to know who authorized this kind of excessive security protocol." I showed her the manual with her initials on every page. And what was her response? She said, "You deliberately sabotaged the company. That this was some kind of revenge scheme because you were upset about being let go." I almost laughed. Almost. "Sarah, did I delete any files? Corrupt any data? Access any systems I wasn't authorized to use? No, of course not. You've been completely professional." "Then how exactly did I sabotage anything?" "All I did was stop working here. The system is functioning exactly as designed, protecting the company from compliance violations when critical personnel are terminated without proper protocol." The beautiful thing about Clause G15.7 was its complete legitimacy. I hadn't sabotaged anything, hadn't violated any policies or laws. I just stopped being the human safety net that had been catching management's mistakes for 22 years. Every shortcut Lisa wanted to take, every corner she planned to cut, every compliance requirement she thought was optional, they were all about to become very expensive lessons. My phone buzzed with a text from Steve Walsh. "They're asking if you'll come in as a consultant to help fix this. Emergency board meeting at 1000. Lisa looks like she's about to cry. I finished my coffee and thought about it. They wanted me to walk back into that building, pretend the last 72 hours hadn't happened, and quietly fix the problems Lisa's arrogance had created. Probably offer me some consulting rate, act like they were doing me a favor. But here's what Lisa and her board still didn't understand. This wasn't about money or pride or even revenge. This was about respect for institutional knowledge, about understanding that experience isn't something you can download from the internet or learn in a graduate seminar. For 22 years, I'd been the bridge between Morrison's aggressive business practices and the federal compliance requirements that kept us legitimate. I'd prevented dozens of audit flags, caught hundreds of potential violations, maintained relationships with agency contacts that took decades to build. When Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast in 2005, I worked 16-hour days for 3 weeks straight to reroute supply chains and keep emergency contracts flowing. When the Pentagon changed procurement protocols in 2012, I spent 6 months rewriting every standard operating procedure to maintain compliance. Lisa thought she could replace all of that with automated systems and junior staff. She was about to discover what happens when you fire your institutional memory. At 09:47, my phone rang again. Tom Morrison himself, the CEO, Lisa's father, the man who'd hired me straight out of the Army and trusted me to keep his company compliant for over 2 decades. "Marcus," he said, and his voice sounded tired in a way I'd never heard before. We need to talk. I'm listening, Tom. Lisa made a mistake. A big one. I'm looking at preliminary numbers from Sarah and our outside counsel, and this compliance freeze could cost us $8 million in contracted obligations. The DCAA wants a full audit. We need your help to fix this. I let the silence stretch out for a few seconds. Tom Morrison was a good man, built his company from nothing after his own Army service, treated his employees fairly for the most part. But he'd let his daughter make a decision that disrespected every veteran employee in that building. Tom, I said finally, Lisa didn't make a mistake. She made a choice. She chose to ignore 22 years of institutional knowledge, chose to fire the one person who understood your compliance infrastructure, and she did it without reading the protocols that would have prevented this exact situation. So what do you want? Name your price, consulting rate, contractor status, whatever it takes to get us through this audit. That's when I knew he still didn't get it. Still thought this was about negotiation, about finding the right financial incentive to make the problem go away. Tom, I appreciate the call, but I'm not coming back. Lisa wanted fresh energy and streamlined processes. Let her figure out how to explain to the DCAA why your compliance protocols collapsed 48 hours after she took control. I hung up and walked to my kitchen window, could see downtown from here, including the Morrison Defense Building where I'd spent the better part of my adult life. Somewhere in that building, Lisa Parker was learning that leadership isn't about having the latest MBA buzzwords. It's about understanding the systems you're responsible for and respecting the people who built them. The phone kept ringing. Al Rodriguez called at 11:15, said they'd brought in an outside consulting firm, but the consultants couldn't access the compliance databases without my authorization codes. Jim Patterson texted at 12:30, said Lisa had locked herself in her office and wouldn't come out for meetings. Steve Walsh called at 14:15, said Tom Morrison was personally calling every federal contracting officer they worked with, trying to do damage control. But the real news came that evening. Sarah Brooks called just as I was finishing dinner, and she sounded exhausted. Marcus, I need to update you on something. This morning's review found additional problems we didn't catch initially. The compliance system flagged 17 contracts for technical violations going back 8 months, things you'd been manually correcting without formal documentation. I set down my fork. What kind of violations? Authorization overrides, timeline extensions, specification modifications. All legitimate business decisions, but they should have been formally documented and reported to the agencies. You'd been handling that administratively, but without your oversight. The system treats them as violations. Exactly. And Sarah, there's more. The Port Authority isn't the only contract we've lost. Defense Logistics Agency suspended our preferred vendor status pending review. That's $4.2 million in annual recurring business. I did the math quickly. Morrison Defense Solutions had approximately $23 million in annual revenue. Losing $4.2 million in recurring business, plus the $18 million Port Authority contract, plus whatever penalties came from the DCAA audit, they were looking at a potential 40% revenue hit. How's the board taking the news? Emergency session scheduled for tomorrow morning. Word is they're considering bringing in interim management. Lisa's been reassigned to special projects. Special projects. Corporate speak for we can't fire the CEO's daughter, but we can't let her make any more decisions either. Marcus, Sarah continued, I have to ask, is there any way you'd consider coming back? Even temporarily, just to get us through the audit? I looked out my kitchen window again, at the city lights reflecting off the river. Somewhere out there, Morrison Defense Solutions was hemorrhaging money and credibility because one MBA graduate thought she knew better than 22 years of hard-earned experience. Sarah, you know I respect you. You're one of the best compliance officers I've ever worked with. But I can't come back to clean up a mess that could have been prevented if anyone had bothered to read the protocols I spent 3 years writing. I understand. For what it's worth, I told the board this was preventable. I told them you were protecting the company, not attacking it. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about the team I'd built over the years. Good people who understood that compliance wasn't about checking boxes. It was about building trust with federal agencies, maintaining relationships that took decades to develop, understanding that in defense contracting, your reputation is everything. 2 weeks later, I was having lunch at my kitchen table when the business section of the local paper caught my attention. Morrison Defense Solutions under federal review. Defense contracts suspended pending audit. The article was brief but damaging. DCAA investigation, compliance violations, management restructuring under review, stock price down 31% in 2 weeks. The kind of news that makes other companies very nervous about working with you and makes federal agencies start looking for alternative contractors. But what really caught my eye was the sidebar. Titan Logistics wins Port Authority contract. Local firm beats established competition. Titan Logistics. I knew them well, one of Morrison's biggest competitors based about 45 minutes north in Richmond. They'd been trying to break into the government contracting space for years, but always came up short on compliance expertise. Smart operation, good equipment, solid reputation in commercial logistics, but they never had the institutional knowledge to navigate federal requirements. I was still reading when my phone rang. Unknown number, but something made me answer. Mr. Thompson, this is David Sterling, CFO at Titan Logistics. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I set down my coffee. How can I help you, Mr. Sterling? We've been following the situation at Morrison Defense. Industry news travels fast, as you know. We also heard through our network that you might be available for new opportunities. Depends on the opportunity. We just landed the Port Authority logistics contract. $18 million over 3 years. Exactly the one Morrison was competing for. But we're honest about our limitations. We need someone who understands federal compliance inside and out. Someone who can build the infrastructure we need to handle this kind of project properly. I leaned back in my chair. The Port Authority contract. The same one Morrison had lost when Lisa triggered the audit. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Immediate start if you're interested. Full-time position, not consulting. Director of Compliance Operations. You'd have complete authority over protocols, hiring, process development, vendor relationships. Essentially, you'd build the department from scratch according to your specifications. The offer was interesting, more than interesting. It was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been looking for. A chance to build something right from the beginning without having to work around 20 years of accumulated shortcuts and bad decisions. What's the compensation package? Sterling didn't hesitate. Base salary $145,000, performance bonuses tied to contract compliance metrics, full benefits including health and dental, 4 weeks paid vacation, and a $15,000 signing bonus. And Mr. Thompson, we've done our homework. We know what you accomplished at Morrison. You'd have the resources and authority to do it right this time. It was almost double what I'd been making at Morrison. More than that, it was respect for what I'd spent 2 decades learning. I'll need to think about it, of course. But Marcus, can I call you Marcus? I want you to know something. We didn't just hear about you through industry contacts. Tom Morrison called me himself last week, told me that if we wanted to succeed in government contracting, we needed to hire you before anyone else figured out you were available. That stopped me cold. Tom Morrison, recommending me to his competition, after Lisa had called me legacy thinking and walked me out with security. Tom said that? His exact words were, Marcus Thompson is the reason we stayed compliant for 22 years. Whoever hires him next is going to eat our lunch on every federal contract for the next decade. He also said we should be prepared to pay whatever it takes to get you. I thanked Sterling, promised to call him back within 48 hours, and hung up. Then I sat there for a while, thinking about what Tom Morrison had really been telling me. It wasn't just a recommendation, it was an admission. An acknowledgement that Lisa's streamlining had cost him the one asset his company couldn't replace. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Jim Patterson. Marcus, thought you should know. Board meeting this morning. Lisa's out as VP, demoted to special projects reporting to Tom directly. They're bringing in McKinsey to do a full operational review. 3 more guys from our old team got let go this morning. I wasn't surprised. The DCAA doesn't mess around with compliance violations, especially when they involve defense contractors with active federal projects. Morrison was looking at months of audits, restricted bidding on new contracts, and the kind of scrutiny that makes federal agencies very reluctant to work with you. Meanwhile, I was being offered the chance to build exactly what I'd always wanted: a compliance department with proper resources, management support, and the authority to do things right from day one. I called Sterling back that evening. Mr. Sterling, Marcus Thompson, I'm accepting your offer. Outstanding. When can you start? Monday morning. But I have a few conditions. Name them. First, I want hiring authority for my department. The people I bring in need to understand that compliance isn't about checking boxes. It's about building relationships with federal agencies based on trust and reliability. Agreed. Second, any major operational decision that affects federal contracts comes through my office for compliance review before implementation. No exceptions, no matter how urgent. Absolutely. Third, I want quarterly presentations to your board about compliance infrastructure. They need to understand what it takes to maintain federal contractor status and why cutting corners in this area is never worth the risk. Done. Anything else? Just one thing. I know several experienced professionals who are currently between positions. Good people who understand government contracting, people who've been let go because companies thought they could automate institutional knowledge. Sterling laughed. You mean the other guys Morrison let go? That's exactly what I mean. Marcus, if you can build us a compliance team that keeps federal auditors happy and contracts flowing smoothly, you can hire whoever you want. Monday morning, I walked into Titan Logistics headquarters wearing my best suit and carrying the same leather portfolio that had seen me through more contract negotiations than I could count. The lobby was clean, modern, professional. No photos of employees marked as problems. No red markers labeling people as obsolete. David Sterling met me personally, walked me to a corner office with windows facing the river. Your office, he said. We'll have the nameplate ready by Wednesday. Director of Compliance Operations. The title looked good on paper, but what looked even better was the conference room next door, already set up for my first department meeting. By the end of the week, I'd hired Jim Patterson as Senior Compliance Analyst, Al Rodriguez as Procurement Compliance Specialist, and Steve Walsh as Contract Management Director. The same team Lisa Parker had dismissed as legacy thinking was now running compliance for Morrison's biggest competitor, and this time we had something we'd never had before, a management team that understood our value and gave us the authority to do our jobs properly.